Thank you for tuning in to the Spot Burn Podcast, brought to you by Musky Fool. Join your hosts, Dan and Josh, as we ignite the hottest topics in fly fishing, answer your burning questions, and get fired up about our love for the great outdoors. Now let's get burning. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Spot Burn Podcast, episode 39. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Mr. Paul Cunningham, a fisheries ecologist from the Wisconsin DNR. He's leading up the Brook Trout Reserves Program. Paul is here today with us to talk about the Brook Trout Reserves Program and the high-stakes future for Wisconsin native brookies. Even if brook trout aren't your thing, I assure you that this episode is still going to have valuable information for you. We're going to do a deep dive into the work he and his team have done over the years and continue to do to ensure this iconic species thrives for generations to come. We're going to talk about the impact of brown trout on brook trout genetics, and a whole lot more. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Well, thanks for having me, Josh and Dan. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the
forward
studio.
To our conversation.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, you're very welcome.
And
Thanks
you
for coming.
are you asked to come in person, which is we love. We normally have to hunt people down, but you wanted to come here. You've been in the shop before.
Yeah, and I'm close. I'm in Madison, so it's not inconvenient. And in the department, we do enough virtual meetings. It's nice to get out and about once in a while. They do let us out of
Does
downtown.
this count as field work, or is this not?
Yeah, I work in the central office downtown,
Okay.
so I could probably call it a field day.
There you go.
Field work.
Perfect.
I like that
Perfect.
idea, Dan.
I love it.
That's awesome. Well, before we get too deep into some of these topics, Paul, would you give our listeners just a brief background of where you grew up and how you found your way into the fisheries management system?
Sure. I'm from rural southern Wisconsin, grew up in Rock County.
Nice.
My great-grandfather was the first mayor of Beloit, and I went to Cunningham School, my namesake school, named after him.
Perfect.
We moved out of into the country in Rock County, and I learned to hunt and fish down in southern Wisconsin. I did my undergraduate degree at University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, as most professionals do in the state of Wisconsin in natural resources. Spent a little time on Lake Michigan, studying yellow perch movements with Wisconsin DNR. After I graduated from Point, did a Master's of Science at the Ohio State University.
We have another Buckeye grad next door. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I worked on Lake Erie for 4 years, and then I hiked out to northwest Minnesota on the edge of the prairie and worked for Minnesota Fisheries Research Program for the Minnesota DNR. And then I came back to my home state and in 1992. So I've been with the department permanently since 1992. And I took the fisheries ecologist job in 94. And I've got probably one of the best jobs in the department. As the fisheries ecologist, I deal with a wide array of things since 94 to present, and I'm given a lot of creative freedom and I've got a great group of folks that surround us with a lot of intellectual energy, synergy, and the young kids that are analytical, and the tools we have today are awesome. I love angling. I like hunting probably a little more, I must confess. I don't fit your model like you guys at Musky Fool, where you become recreational specialists, very down. I'm more considered a generalist. I fish trout. I like fishing brown trout at night with a fly rod.
Nice.
I like catching.
We like doing that too.
If I'm out in the day on a trout stream, I probably have a fly rod and a spinning rod, and I'm probably using the spinning rod most. My favorite fish to fish for is probably bluegill.
Love it.
I like fishing pike in the winter. So I'm more of a generalist. Maybe,
Love it.
in this advancement model, I've probably just stagnated. I'm just not advancing. If you're like a deer hunter or a bow hunter, you're going to advance to almost you want to jump out of a tree with a ladle lift.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, there's a famous I can't remember who said it, but it's like the progression of any hunter and angler, and it's like you want to catch your first one, then you want to catch a lot, then you want to catch the biggest one, then you
really don't care.
Well, and then you get to the point where you don't even want to catch them anymore. You just want to see them, you know, and it kind of like you come all the way around.
It's a professor out of Texas, Robert Ditton. It's called the recreational specialization model.
Okay.
About motivations in recreation, and it's that specialization approach. I'm probably more remedial. I am just not progressing around that general model.
You're probably being kind. You're probably being. What do you like to hunt for?
I spend my falls on sampling wildlife on the Missouri Coteau out in North Dakota. So I hunt doves, sharp-tailed grouse, pheasants, and waterfowl out there quite a bit. I bow hunt deer, of course. So I hunt quite a bit, and I enjoy hunting pheasants as well. And I raise Drahthaars, they're a German Wehrherd type breed, and so I enjoy blood tracking with my dog on bow shot deer with my kids.
Cool.
So yeah, I'm an outdoor enthusiast. That was probably my initial tractions to becoming a fisheries professional.
Cool.
You know, I had those important connections through my family, my father, you know, growing up in a rural landscape, and so I consider myself blessed that way.
Very cool. Very cool.
What are some of your favorite aspects of the role that you play today, and some of the challenges that are in that role as well?
And I think just to add, because you mentioned, I think you said, I think I have one of the coolest jobs.
Yeah.
And we've talked to some like fisheries biologists for a region, and you know, there's the musky team, and so kind of paint a little bit of the picture too of like where it all fits in, given that you're in fisheries ecology. And it sounds like that's different than if I were to contact my local fish biologist for this region or the next region or something like that.
So I have a statewide responsibility. I don't have a field jurisdiction like, you know, Dan Oley will cover Greene, Rock, and Dane counties. I have statewide responsibility, and most of my career I've been dealing with warm water lakes, lake restoration, shallow lake management, dealing with invasive common carp, water law policy. I'm now in more, I would say, the twilight of my career. I deal with a lot of master planning. So in the state of Wisconsin, we have 1.6 million acres of property that we are required by law to engage with our publics on how we manage their property. It's not DNR property, it's the public's property. So I'm involved in master planning, land acquisition for our fisheries program, and I lead and oversee our stream bank protection program statewide. And like you said, you know, you're familiar with the musky team. We have species teams for many things, and I lead the northern pike team for the department, co-lead it with our biologist out of Adams and Genoa County, Jen Bergman. So Jen and I lead that team.
Okay, that's very interesting. So if you trout fish in Wisconsin,
yes,
whether it's with a fly or a spinning rod, whether it's driftless, you know, northern streams, Langlade County, Lake Run, like it's kind of, some of that is under your influence. I mean, I think in our research, it was like, and I'd love for you to color some of this in, like you wrote the big part in writing the driftless restoration. The driftless restoration plan, if we use a public easement, that's all from that stream bank protection program. I think a lot of our customers, a lot of us, take this stuff for granted. So it wasn't on our cheat sheet, but just hearing you say it, I'd love to hear you just talk about that a little bit.
I think, you know, I do, my workload does, I attempt to gravitate to the long game, the bigger things. And the long game is about protecting these habitats for future generations to secure the status of our fisheries. And we're blessed in the trout program to have a full array of management tools. Trout afford more protection regulatorily. Our fishery areas focus on cold water streams. We have a dedicated stamp account, you know, and so we have propagation, of course, and stocking, and we have sport fish regulations as well. So we have the whole toolbox generally in the department to manage that array of species. And in my role in the program, I'm not the cold water trout team leader. Brad Sims is our rivers and streams team leader, but I have this interest in analytical aspects in property master planning And, we'll talk about climate change, but when you think about master planning, that drives where we're going to buy land or land rights. We'd best not buy land around a stream that's going to be a creek chub sucker stream and not a good smallmouth stream, and it'll lose its trout in another 30 years too. So the department needs to think often beyond fiscal years and biennium and short-term performance measures, and with the Brook Trout Reserves, that's what we're talking about too. We don't think about this thing in 2-year or 4-year cycles. So
yeah, that makes sense. And hearing you say that too, I always like to ask folks that work at the DNR, because I don't envy you guys, because you sit in between. Like, we feel it where we we buy things from manufacturers, and we're kind of in between the manufacturer and the customer, but that pales in comparison between being in between the government and anglers, and you get angler feedback and government priorities. So before we kind of keep moving on, I'd just love to hear you talk about that. Like, you've been at this for a long time. I didn't want to say it earlier, but you've been at this in the trout program pretty much my entire life. How do you, it doesn't seem like it's weighing on you. It seems like you still got the pep in your step and you like it.
Yeah, I'm motivated because we don't have an angler. There's no average angler. We have when I was in Minnesota, I worked on social components of market segmentation of our angling public and understanding angler preferences, and there really is no average anglers. And because there is no average angler, there's also management of resource conflicts, and so that conflict management, you have to have the right mindset. You do have to get thick skin too through your career, in terms of dealing with conflict resolution in resource management decision making. And I don't shy away from that. For example, I'm working on a project before I retire to try and get all of our platted access lands mapped in the state, which are these keyhole properties leading into lakes and streams. Wow. That are part of road right-of-ways that are unknown to many of the public. It's kind of like managed forest law, open MFLs were one day. So, and that brings about a tension between private landowners and public access rights. And that's a healthy conflict. In the interest of the long term of the public trust to our public waters, that conflict always exists. And we need to cultivate that conflict to secure the rights of our folks that can't afford waterfront property. I'm blessed. I've got I'd hate to say it, 9 watercraft in my garage and out around me. A lot of people don't have watercraft. They don't have a car. They might be able to walk to a lake or stream, and they just don't have all this. And I'm blessed, and so I'm interested in
blessed.
providing access. Yeah, we all are.
And it's so cool to hear you say that, because there's multiple dimensions there. We often talk about, it's really easy to take just to looking at Wisconsin trout fishing for granted. We have employees, we have friends, we have customers who live in Colorado or Utah, places you can't even drop an anchor in the middle of the river, where there's private rivers and ranches where you have to pay to fish. And we don't even know it. We don't even really know what that is here in Wisconsin. I mean, you just have so much where to go. And even just for trout,
we do.
Like,
yes.
And I think we often say it in the shop, like, the miles of public trout water that we have exceeds Montana. It's different. It doesn't look the same, but it's like,
jump off any bridge deck and be fishing.
Right.
Yep.
And then I think trout streams.
And I think you said something as well that we feel at the shop, and is honestly what we love about what we get to do and why we love Wisconsin. And I think maybe why some of the guys moved back from Colorado, why I have not left, why Josh has not left, is because it's not a one-horse pony. Right now, you could be getting ready to go walleye fishing. You could be trout fishing in the driftless. You could be chasing steelhead. You could be chasing brown trout in the harbor. A month from now, smallmouth bass. And that, to your point about, there's not one single type of angler. Right. I think that's indicative of the freaking awesome resource we have. We just don't have snow-capped mountains. True, yeah. But that's fine. That's fine. Because they're having their own issues with all those ski hills so far.
Yes.
So, yeah. So I'm already having a blast talking with you, Paul. Josh is giving me the side eye because I've gone off script and we are 5 minutes in. but that's how I do it. So bring us back, Bam Bam.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, you want to go?
Yeah, I'd
We
love
could
to
just
get a little
jump in.
bit. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more too. You were saying so much good stuff. I wanted to jump in it, but I'd love to, behind the scenes. What was it about? How did this become your love that you dedicated your whole life to it, and you're not burnt out? You still fish and hunt on your own.
The Brook Trout Reserves.
Just
Fisheries?
your dedication to fisheries and your dedication to this for your entire life. And then I think I say that because sometimes I'll talk to folks who that's their professional career, but it exhausts them in a way that they don't fish and hunt on their personal time. And to hear you, I mean, you're all in hunting, fishing, fisheries management. I can still kind of, in just hearing you talk about it, sense the excitement you still have for it.
I enjoy my job a lot. I think, first of all, I work with great people. The people that come to the Department of Natural Resources believe in what they do. They're not pulling in a paycheck. We're not compensated greatly, by and large. They're committed to the resource. They're committed to the publics they serve. They're public servants that are really all in motivationally. And when you're around people like that, that can be infectious. So that's an energy that you can create. I also have been around long enough to try and avoid the noise, to focus on the things that matter in the long run. And what motivates me is taking on efforts where you can really move the needle. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking about, did I do everything perfect? I'm thinking about an end result of something. And so, one of the things I was committed to was before I retired, I wanted to make sure I could walk away from the Brook Trout Reserves Program and it had momentum. And it was getting enough momentum that it could be carried on. There's a lot of great people that will replace me in my job or wherever, but motivation and the desire to really commit to doing your best at your job. You guys take great pleasure and motivation in your customers at Musky Fool. I feel the same way about our customers, our angling publics, and the resources that we manage. And in the public lands arena and buying land and land rights gives me so much psychological income. Those things don't go away. Those are lasting investments that my grandchildren's grandchildren will appreciate. So those are the fun things of my job, and that's what keeps me getting up every morning.
I love it. I like psychological income. That's a good way to think about it.
It's not monetary income. It's psychological.
That's a very
income.
good term.
Yeah. So before we move on, I guess building on that, some 17-year-old girl or guy is probably headed to Stevens Point University to pursue a career in this. What would you tell them after what you've been experienced for years?
Don't pursue work in the federal government right now.
Probably a wise recommendation.
Hopefully you're not motivated too much by money. You got to love working with people. You say, well, I'll be out in the field all the time. No, managing natural resources is about managing people as well. So you got to love working with others. You got to love being in the management side, not so much research. Research you can kind of isolate and collaborate, but do your own thing. And management, you really got to work as a part of a team too. So you got to be a facilitating team type player or find your role in that team environment. You got to love your customers and love the resource that you manage. And you've got to make personal sacrifices that, you go through, you get a undergraduate and a master's of science and a PhD or a postdoc. I have colleagues that are postdocs that work with us. And you're not necessarily compensated for all of that, monetarily. So I don't think you want to be motivated too much about making a ton of money. And
intrinsic, there's a big intrinsic motivation though. I'm hearing though. It's just
and
hearing psychological income.
And it's amazing how today's kids, they just jump and shift careers. You shifted careers. I wouldn't even thought of what you just did in your career shift.
Yeah.
I came from that mindset. I have served as the fisheries ecologist, think about it, for the last 30 years.
32, because I was born in 91.
For the department, and I was as a fisheries ecologist for 30 years. I'm like a dinosaur that but
yeah, but
I don't
also
supervise. That's a headache. I don't have to deal with supervision. I deal with water law issues. I deal with a lot of policy issues. I deal with the resource. They're all fun things to me. I deal with science. I'm not a scientist anymore. I'm a retired scientist. I'm a consumer of science. I'm a practitioner, and I need science for everything I do. But those are elements of my job that I love.
Plus, you've seen it. I think just being in that position, having the purview, having the mentality you have, and being at it for 30 years, you've seen all the ebbs and flows. You've seen the surges at the DNR, the divestments of the Walker administration, the changes, political wins, and you've kind of just
been there, done it,
kept it steady, kept going, focused on the bigger problem, which is cool.
And I think that's we're not vulnerable to that. I'm not invulnerable to those effects, but obviously the mission stays the same. I don't think any governor or any secretary has rewritten the department's mission statements.
No, not yet.
We've gotten sidetracked, but through the years here and there. But by and large, as I've aged, I have a lot of institutional memory, or I've forgotten things now too. With
intentionally or not, yeah. I think it's cool though and important because as anglers, and we've even done it on this podcast, where like we get short term, where we're like, if you just like come to a Muskies Inc. meeting or a Trout Unlimited meeting, they're gonna be like, yeah, well, 5 years ago we used to catch big ones in there, and we just need to stock more. And it's all about like the past 3 years, the next 3 years. And it's not, I don't meet many people that are speaking at the language you are of like, no, I'm thinking about like the next 75 years of brook trout. And so I'm excited to get into it a little bit.
Yeah,
this is cool.
I am too.
Good. Any questions for us before we kind of get after it?
No, let's get after it.
Good. Josh, what's up? Are we going to start with, got it.
Yeah, Paul, if you could just kind of introduce the Brook Trout Reserve Program and kind of bottom line for our listeners, what's at stake for these brook trout currently and then going into the future, the next 30 years?
Sure. I can give you that bigger overview, I think, is what you're asking for. So let's step back a little.
Sure.
CO2 levels are at, atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide are at the highest level in the last 650,000 years. And those emissions and those atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases are from human causes. Me driving my truck to get here. I'm a contributor of that greenhouse gas effect. We're on an unsustainable track of emitting greenhouse gases that are causing widespread impacts on our climate globally. And we're feeling it here today. So from that perspective, climate change is occurring now. Our temperature, today's March 13th, Dan?
Supposed to be 75 tomorrow.
March 13th. Now that's weather, that's not climate, but they're related. Today, our climate is ever increasing. Our streams are warming. So in the bigger picture, we have brook trout are what we call stenotherms, cold water, they require cold, clear water with plenty of oxygen, good water quality, the right habitat. And our brook trout thrive in streams where the summer temps are roughly between 55 and 61 is their optimum. And when our brook trout experience stream temperatures above 75 degrees for a 3-day period, they can't survive. Their goose is cooked, so to speak. And those thermal conditions on our cold water streams are occurring more frequently now with climate change. So our streams are warming, and we have amassed enough science across the state to understand the implications of this. And so in the next 30 years, we expect to lose 2 out of every 3 stream miles of brook trout habitat. That's our peer-reviewed science. That's all our modeling, all our forecasting to say two-thirds we're going to lose in the next 30 years.
Thousands of miles of streams. Wow.
We have 22,000 miles of brook trout habitat today, okay? And we're going to lose 15,000 by the mid-century, 2050. Wow. That leaves 7,000 remaining by my simple-minded math.
Yeah, right.
And that's pretty sobering.
For real. I mean, is it fair to say without the Brook Trout Reserve, if we would have kept on the course we're on, native brook trout in Wisconsin are on an extinction path.
No, I wouldn't say extinction path. They're certainly their distribution will be reduced. They're threatened. When I was working on when we were working on the driftless master plan, it's a tome about what we knew in driftless area streams. John Pullman and I were thinking about. We were writing. It's an environmental assessment. We were writing it, and we said. We used the word extirpation. So we're in here, we're at Wanakee. If you went out, you guys know where Military Ridge is, pretty much defines the Wisconsin River Basin with the Platte and the Pecky. One of our findings was that everything south of Military Ridge would be extirpated for brook trout. So we'll have local extirpations throughout the state in different areas. And some of these brookies will be pushed up into the very small area of headwaters on some of our thermally less resilient, because not all streams are the same. But I don't think it'll be a case of extinction, but nonetheless, 2/3 of their habitat is being lost. That's pretty sobering. And that speaks to a statewide, and this is a regional crisis for our cold water species, our only native stream trout in the state.
Correct. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it's not like, and maybe you can paint some color to this. We're talking numbers coming from 22,000 miles down to 7, but it was a lot more than 22,000 back in 50 years ago too. Is that fair to say? Like we're still 22,000 is less than what it used to be. Given
I think we've increased.
Really?
Yeah, we didn't in the 50s and 60s. A lot of our land use conditions, our land use is improved, and maybe we should talk about this later. But we're actually in a pretty good scene in terms of cold water streams right now, and there's a few reasons that we might want to talk about why it gives us a false sense of security right now.
Interesting. We should come back to that because I do think we wanted to talk about just in general the driftless restoration program, the stream bank protection program. I think it feels like, again, like our generation, having kind of been born into this, we're just like, oh, this is so cool. But there was a day that you can probably recall where that wasn't the case. We didn't have Dane County easements and DNR easements and all of this access. And it does feel like that. We do have it pretty good right now. The fishing, the conditions, the fisheries are good.
So, but in that bigger picture, and we'll come back to that, but in that bigger picture of this statewide concern, the sobering effect, it underscores for us to be smart about this, to be able to prioritize. And you guys I know you're familiar with this resist, accept, direct framework and climate adaptation. In the climate management systems of climate science, you deal with two aspects, mitigation versus adaptation. I don't deal with mitigation. That's not part of my job, is to figuring out how to reduce CO2 emissions or atmospheric levels, or how we would contribute to that. I'm trying to figure out how we will adapt to the inevitable changes that are occurring right now. And so it's sobering, and so that's when we began to think, gosh, that's jaw-dropping. And what are we going to do about it? Well, first of all, we better understand where this is going to really be bad under that resist, accept, direct framework. Where do you cut your losses? Because no matter what you do, you might not be able to salvage this in some streams. Right. And where do you find the best of the best that are worth investing in? And where are our strongholds for brook trout, our native stream fish, that we want to focus on, these strongholds? And that's when we developed this idea of brook trout reserves, finding the best of the best, focusing our energies and managing on them
instead of spreading.
So that's the bigger picture.
Okay. That makes sense. Do you you had made a comment about we could kind of get complacent because of the current situation. It feels like it's, you might ask the average person, it's good. And related to that, that could be a possible reason for why this isn't getting the attention it deserves. I think it's slowly starting to, and hopefully a few more people will know about it after this podcast.
Well, and thanks to you guys for having me, because we like to talk about this important issue. Mm-hmm. I tend to think that it's not getting the attention it deserves for a few reasons. First of all, I don't know if trout are as popular as some of our other species being sought among our anglers. You know, we roughly have about 20% of our angling public fishes trout, that buy trout stamps and they fish inland trout. And for you guys, you fish, hence Musky Fool, you fish muskies. You're fishing, and you're not fishing northern pike. You're very dedicated to muskies. Trout anglers, I think, we could debate this a bit, but I think are more generalists. They like catching brown trout as well as brook trout. And right now we've been living in a pretty wet climate. We're adding classified trout miles of new water because of our wetter climate's creating enhanced base flows. So our base flows and our cold base flows are pretty good right now. And that has come to the benefit primarily of brown trout. And so if you're fishing trout, a retired scientist for our group, John Lyons, you might have heard of him, he described this as the Goldilocks period, because trout angling is pretty good right now. And so it gives you this false sense, because brown trout are up. Mm-hmm. Brookies are declining. They've been declining since about the 90s, mid-90s or so. The brookies are declining. The browns are up. Trout anglers want to catch trout. And honestly, our non-native browns are okay. Yeah, and they're an important element of our fishery, so I don't want to
they might not even know the difference, Paul. We see it with muskies and pike. We hear it with customers, and they're not being. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just stating a fact. Like, some people probably don't even know the difference between a brown trout and a brook trout. So they're just like, yeah, we're catching them. We're doing,
Yeah, and
as long as they eat my dry fly, I don't care what color it is.
There's another reason why brown trout are popular too, is they grow to a larger size, and our anglers today, more often and more frequently, are interested in the size of the catch. The size of the fish they catch influences the quality of their fishing trip more and more so today than it ever was before. Our anglers are pursuing bigger fish, and so browns are up. They
Funny
grow
you
bigger.
Say that. Yeah, we were
so that's
about
a false sense of security.
Absolutely, yeah.
We were supposed to be chasing world record brown trout tomorrow on a fly rod, and I'm just laughing because we chose not to go, to the driftless to catch a bunch of fish. We were like, well, we want 1 36-incher, and I'm just sitting there like, yeah, you're right, damn musky guys and big fish chasers. But it's interesting to hear you say that.
I like catching big browns too. So
I love it. So I guess that's helping us and paint this picture of like kind of where we're at. I think before we
the other thing I wanted to mention, Dan, is that why this hasn't gotten as much attention. To be honest, is we're just rolling it out. We've been working behind the scenes since I started this effort in about 2013, and doing a lot of analysis and thinking. And we had a Brook Trout Reserves team, but really we're starting to really start to roll this out. So it is fairly fresh from that perspective. So cool. I don't know what our anglers think about it, but I do know we enjoy broad, sweeping support among the State Council of Trout Unlimited and the local chapters, other professional organizations, the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service staff, EPA, and we'll talk about the EPA a little. So I think from that standpoint, our partner agencies and our partner conservation groups are beginning to talk about this quite a bit.
Awesome.
I think our average anglers, aren't aware of it at all.
I don't think they are either. That being said, I think this is the part that I don't envy you guys at the DNR, because you do something like Brook Trout Reserves and you announce it, and I know the feedback it's going to get from every different county. There's going to be somebody with a different opinion about their local fishery, and you're trying to solve for the whole state. But I think this, I know when Josh and I saw this, we were excited. I think under the hood, the local Wisconsin, been here most of their life, trout fishes, This is music to their ears, because I think we all kind of assumed that it was over. It was kind of like, we're kind of just like, yeah, brook trout are, there's not a chance. The brown trout are taking over, and I think so to hear that this is how we're thinking about it, like it's literally kind of protecting the last remaining best brook trout water. It's pretty sweet. So I think as that kind of spreads, you're going to get a lot of positive feedback, hopefully. Yeah, because it's really cool. So that makes sense. It's new. It's fresh. The other thing I think related to that, though, that I want to just hear your thoughts on before we get kind of into the deep dive of some more of the program is like, another thing we try to espouse here is like, we obviously care the most about muskie, but one of the reasons we do from a conservation standpoint, not just angling, is this idea of apex predators and, kind of can be canaries in the coal mine. I used to read a little bit about this with grizzly bears. Like, they start leaving first because they don't have the prey, they don't have the habitat. And I think we generally see that with muskies. Not the exact same, but I'm hearing some of the similarities with you with brook trout. When it comes to like climate change and our cold water, they're the canary in the coal mine a little bit. And I don't know if you would agree with that or what you might say in response to that.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at assessing stream health quality in cold water, so we classify streams based on the thermal conditions. And so for cold water streams, we've developed indexes of biotic integrity, and the abundance of a native stream trout like brook trout is the key to that, drives that index of stream health too. So they are a canary in the coal mine, and they are the ambassador of that influence of the watershed on the stream, influence of groundwater on that stream, and the health of that stream and its thermal conditions.
Interesting.
And so they are more than a canary. They're also an ambassador because they're an important sport fish.
Right.
Right. And I don't.
That's a good point.
I got one on YouTube, guys, about muskie. This brook trout is a more beautiful fish.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. No,
Okay.
With not even.
Well,
It's not that big.
No, not
I
even.
get that, but it is a beautiful fish. And
Probably
I
the
don't-
most beautiful.
I'll put that fish up against most fish.
Yes.
You I don't know about you, but me too.
I agree
Yeah.
wholeheartedly with
Yeah.
that statement for sure.
We've actually.
See, I'm less subjective now.
Yeah.
I know,
I got
there's-
to be careful.
Muskies
No,
are
and this
ugly
is-
and stinky. So.
This is actually like, and you can fact check us on this, because from the beginning of Musky Fool, whenever we've posted a trout on our website, if you go on our website and you look at trout stuff, or you even look at the t-shirts and the designs we've made with trout, every single time it's been a brook trout. And some of it is because we're Wisconsin natives. Muskies are Wisconsin natives.
Amen, brother.
And part of that reason is because, damn, they're pretty.
yeah.
Yeah, they are.
We're not going to put a dirty brown on a t-shirt.
They're beautiful
we
fish.
like to catch them, and they're beautiful fish, but there's a pecking order. So.
Yeah, there is.
Cool. Let's keep her moving, Bam Bam. What do we got next?
Where are we at here, Daniel?
We are on, I guess, still understanding brook trout ecology. So we want to talk about some of like painting the picture, and I think as anglers who fish for trout, we think we know some stuff about trout, but we probably don't know everything, and we probably actually have a lot of things that we think we know that is wrong. So we really just wanted to talk about that. And I think first and foremost, one of the questions we got from some of our employees and some of the listeners was about, when we say Wisconsin native, talk about genetics a little bit. Like, are these still heritage genetics? I know with muskies, it's usually not the case. How should we think about that when we're talking about preserving a brook trout? Is it any old brook trout, or is there some still Wisconsin?
It's a valid question, because some of our strains earlier on didn't originate necessarily from Wisconsin. So we had a couple grad students, Brad Erdman and Andrew Tomitz at the Midwest Conservation Genetics Lab. We've been working on this question, which is, when you're dealing with managing a species, you want to conserve the parts. This is Aldo Leopold thinking. You start tinkering with stuff, you want to conserve the pieces. And we didn't have the science to understand it in the past necessarily. So when you're stocking, say, brook trout to address local declines in abundance, to foster and favor anglers' interests, and you're growing trout in hatcheries, a domesticated stock, and stocking them into public waters, what kind of effects are you having on those local adaptations and those genomes? And so your question was, have we muddied the waters, so to speak? The short answer is yes, we have muddied the waters. The more complete answer is, but there's a ton of diversity still remaining that we haven't muddied. So we've surveyed now 63 wild populations of brook trout, and our advances in genetics and genomic analyses of these populations is ever growing. And we've been looking at which populations have introgression of hatchery stock into them and admixtures and influence of hatchery versus which are really non-hatchery and wild putative wild source populations that have high levels of allelic diversity, are not affected by hatchery production. And we're pretty good up in the Northeast, in the North. We're pretty good in working our way down from Langlade, Shawano, Wapaka, Washera. But then when we start to move south and west, like the southern driftless, we've got a lot of hatchery introgression into those populations.
Is that just mixing? Is that a way to think about introgression? I've never heard that
those
term
hatchery fish survived and contributed to that gene pool of that local population.
So they started
and those
to
hatchery fish have not evolved, and they don't have local adaptation, and so that genetic they're not as fit. Now today, our policies have changed quite a bit around those issues, and we can talk about stocking a little more. But in a general sense, we have muddied the gene pool, but it's not all for naught. We have a lot of genetic diversity still remaining throughout the state, up north, that has high levels of integrity. So we're blessed that we didn't screw them up that bad.
Sure. And it seems like maybe it like overwhelms me to think about all of the watersheds that you think about for brook trout, because I'm just like, you think about muskies, they're bigger. You have Chippewa flowage, you have the Wisconsin River, and of course tributaries and streams. But it just seems like you could have all these one valley over, and it's like different genes, or I don't know if there's any stories like that you have, but it just seems like a much bigger landscape.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the way we think about management of population size, there's mixing between watersheds, and these fish can move between watersheds to some degree. True. But there's some degree of isolation as well. When we did the driftless analysis, we were working at the sub-watershed level, and to give you an idea of that, that's about a little over 1,800 sub-watersheds in the state, of which almost 600 have classified trout streams.
What would be an example I'd be familiar with? Like upper sugar would be?
Let me give you an example that hits you home. So when we did our analysis, we worked at the hydrologic unit code 12. That's a pretty small area. We call them HUC 12s or sub-watersheds. In that context, let's take Black Earth Creek. Okay, that's a HUC 10. And within that watershed of Black Earth Creek, there's 4 sub-watersheds. You got Halfway Prairie, Upper Black Earth, Middle, and Lower. Lower doesn't have trout, classified water. So it's all hierarchical and nested. So that then we have HUC 8s are like basins. Okay, the Lower Wisconsin River Basin, the Pecky, the Platte is a HUC 8. HUC 10s are smaller, and so I think of like a HUC 12 as a neighborhood of these fishes.
Okay, got it.
It's not that they can't move, but that's our unit of analysis and management here.
That makes sense.
Because we get a lot of these brook trout populations at the HUC 12 level are even pushed up into the headwaters of that HUC 12 because of competition from brown trout in the lower sections often too.
That makes sense. Okay.
So in Black Earth Creek, you've got like Garfoot. I think Garfoot has brookies.
I believe it does.
Downstream,
that's the only spot burn you're going to get today, folks. We talked about this beforehand. Paul is
I didn't say
aligned.
go fishing.
No, Paul is aligned on the. He was actually. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but he called us out a little bit. He was like, "I thought this was the spot burning podcast. What are you guys asking for spots or what?" Josh and I were trying to get a few.
Yeah.
We were trying to get a few big brook trout spots, but he's iron fist over there. He's kept it locked down. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. I think this has been amazing so far. On this section, we had some questions. I don't know if you want to get into it, but have some fun with the things all anglers want to know is where do we have big brook trout left? And I know Josh had some questions on that, kind of in the population survey and stuff like that, Josh.
Yeah, are there any interesting findings about size, structure, potential for bigger brook trout in fully naturalized waters?
Well, I don't want to burn spots. A colleague of mine, and I'll pull it out, and maybe I'll just show it on the screen.
Ooh, it's so far away.
I know, that's the idea.
There'll be a couple folks that pause it, zoom it in, clean up the image.
Mike Miller, he's a water resources biologist. He gives this slide to his TU peeps when he's giving talks.
A good reason to sign up for
lighten
TU. Maybe you can get some of this info at the meeting.
This was a Wordle where he pulled all our survey data, and the blue fonts were brook trout, and the green fonts were brown trout streams, and the highest catch rates. Now, this wasn't size, but you take those blue fonts and you work at the lower ends of those streams, is where you'll find bigger brookies often.
Well, the musky guy in me wants to go to some of the smallest ones, where it's tiny, and I'm like, oh, I bet there's some big ones in there, because that's how I would think about it from a musky perspective.
Well, at the right time of the year, maybe.
True.
The other thing is, I'm not going to give you spots per se, but hence spot burn. We don't want to violate the theme here. There are tools out there that we do have, and we survey a lot of waters. When we wrote the driftless regional property analysis, we created these maps, and I will leave a CD for you guys of this document. It's a tome. It's our homework, and we actually took this idea of a subwatershed and a watershed, and we likened it. A master planner and I thought the way to describe these subwatersheds are like students. So in a Huck 8, you might have 30 students, subwatersheds, okay? And then we're going to grade them on their different things, like the amount of public access for this subwatershed, the resilience of the subwatershed to thermal changes, the size structure of the brook trout. And we kicked them out as maps, color-coded maps. These are the students.
That makes sense.
And you can actually turn to this document.
It's a great metaphor, by the way.
Let me grab you an example here.
Is this all publicly available for the most part? If folks are poking around on the internet?
So there's the report card,
I've seen
and they're
these.
color-coded. So
I've
that's
seen these.
A's through F's or
I can
D's.
confirm this is publicly
So
available.
this is like the different metrics. Here are the students. Here are the classes. These are all the subwatersheds. This is a report card on smallmouth bass in the Kickapoo River region. Yep. So it's not trout. The trout are in there too.
Yeah, brook, brown, smallmouth. So there are some.
So there are tools out
pockets,
there you can use. We have our, our trout regulations and opportunities user tool. That'll help you find out where you have access.
Did you say that's getting an update too? Did I catch that earlier?
We're modernizing
right?
some of it. We're going to be retiring the trout regulations and opportunities viewer, the mapper, and converting it over called the Wisconsin Fish Finder. And the Fish Finder will have lakes and other species, and so we're trying to broaden that tool out to be not just trout. For our trout anglers, they're going to have to get used to it. There'll be a little switch and look, but all the data and all the system's still there.
Okay.
So that's will be coming online in next month or so.
Brad, have you? This is unrelated. Have you guys seen or heard of Trout Routes?
Trout Routes?
Yeah, you'll have to check it out. It's a private company, but I believe they're plugging into your DNR databases because it's easements, and they're like reporting on improvement projects, and it's very, very, very cool and usable. And we know a couple.
I'll have to check it out. I've not
couple
seen it.
local guys here, like on the engineering team for trout rods, so it's cool. We recommend it to customers. We recommend all that stuff.
Well,
that's our MO. Is like we want to give you the tools to go find it. If we gave you the coordinates, if Paul gave Josh and I the coordinates, it's not. That misses the point. It's not why.
The fun is in the journey.
That is why I fish.
Absolutely.
The fun is in the journey. And, our job is to have our own journeys about this. There are tools out there. If you appreciate fishing for a few big fish versus a ton of little fish, there are different places. And
we still
often
have...
that transitional water is some of the best water, too, for big fish. No, there's nothing wrong with catching a meal of smaller fish too.
Right.
There's nothing more noble than anything than eating that fish, in my opinion. If it's sustainable within the capacity of the fishery and the rules we create. Trout are a short-lived species, and they're a high-value protein source, and they're great to eat too, and they're great to release too. So, especially the big ones.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think we struggle with that issue a lot because, look who we are. We're a musky fly fishing store. So if you know anything about fishing culture, you're like, those guys have never killed a single fish in their life. They got musky and fly fishing, smash it together. All they do is catch and release. Obviously not true, but I think that's it's weird because that almost gets like celebrated and put on a pedestal. It's like, I catch and release everything. And I just like, you can't only play with your food. Right.
We set ourselves up to a criticism to the European model there. If we don't occasionally eat some of these fish, why are we out there? It's kind of perverse.
Playing with our food.
We're playing with these fish for our own personal joy. At some point, eating a fish is a noble enterprise too. So that's just my personal view.
No,
I'm not speaking on behalf of the department.
I know you're not, but I agree.
We have rules that we regulate anglers, and that's where our bottom line is. Is if we need to protect the stocks more, we'll write laws that require that, and then there are personal choices within the law.
Yep.
And I'm not here to shame or extol any of them.
Right.
They're all valid choices.
That makes sense.
So anyway,
we've been talking for a while that we want to eat a muskie one of these days.
There's some spots that it would be good. It would be like the size.
It tastes great.
I know, that's what we hear, Paul. I love pike. It's my favorite fish to eat. So if you got any good muskie recipes, we're gonna edit this out. We might not edit it out. That's Josh's decision. We'll see.
All right, moving on here.
Well, can we ask him one more question on what's the biggest inland brook trout?
That's the exact question I was going to ask.
You hit it.
Yeah, so from all of your surveys you guys have done, what's the biggest inland brook trout you guys have encountered in the last
recent memory
5 years or so?
I don't know. I'm not dwelling into that data set that way. I am a central office guy that is not doing a lot of field survey work. I have statewide responsibility, and I don't have that luxury. I can tell you personally, my biggest fish I've handled wasn't in a survey. It was catch angling.
Really?
And it was 16 3/4 on an inland stream in the driftwood. That's my biggest.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was a few years back, but I have not poured through the data to answer that. So you stumped me.
Here's one for you. Is it a fool's errand to chase a 20-inch inland brook trout in Wisconsin? I think your answer right there tells me that there's hope. That's all I needed was a pause, Paul.
We could book you a trip to Royale. Isle Royale, okay?
Right.
We could go chase some coasters if that's what you're after. I'm sure it probably exists, but...
it's like that 70-inch muskie.
So like 17 to 18-inch realistically is probably the top of the inland brook trout.
We can pull the data.
Okay.
And look at those maximum lengths from all our surveys.
Okay.
We these brookies that are up in that range, they are piscivorous. They need the right kind of habitat and space. They need to be able to move.
What's that word mean?
Thermal refugia. What?
What's that word mean?
Piscivorous?
They eat fish.
Got it.
They're predating other young fish.
Got it.
They might
Love
be
it. Those are the kinds of fish I like.
Even. Yeah. So they're a little they're in a different realm. That brook trout generally are in terms of the food web production-wise, they're eating insects. And but these guys are at another trophic order. You know, when you're talking to fish that size, often.
Okay.
They'll tee off on major hatches. It's not like they're that much of a specialist that they only eat fish, but a larger percentage of their diet will be young, small forage fish. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
big browns are
That
saying
makes sense.
terrestrial mice,
Yeah. We just had
chipmunks,
love it.
you name it.
Love me
you
a
know,
chipmunk
ducks,
eating brown trout.
You know,
Ducks,
ducklings,
ducklings.
Little
wood
guys.
ducks and stuff like that. You know, be in the diet of big browns and big brookies.
We just had one of the guys at the shop, Tim, did a seminar yesterday.
Rare,
here.
but occur.
He did a seminar on streamer fishing for trout in the driftless, and the whole thing was exactly. I wish we could have had some of those quotes from you, because we spend so much time convincing people that you can throw streamers this big in the driftless and catch trout, and they don't believe us, you know, because I think so much of the conventional wisdom is hatches and insects, but hearing what you're saying, it's like those are just almost different species. The same species, but within that, they're
when they
kind
get
of
big, they're energetic requirements, and they got big by doing something different. You know, and it's not like brook trout are that long-lived. No, they're going to be older fish generally, but Dan, I don't think you should have your hopes for a 20-inch.
All right.
Okay, but we could pull the data. It
right.
might be my
At least
homework
you're being
assignment
honest
to
with
send
me.
you an email that verify what our biggest brookie
I'll go
is
find
in the
it.
last.
I'll go try and find it. If it exists. Should we keep moving? Do a little
Sure.
talk about brown trout, brook trout?
Yeah, keep us moving here,
All
buddy.
right. So this is, I think, from our audience, we asked them a few questions, and from us, before we kind of go in deep to the Brook Trout Reserve Program, you know, you've probably stitched together some of those high level questions, and this is, I think, the last big one, which is like, how did we get here with brown trout? Like, because it just doesn't seem like they're helping. It seems like there's this like cultural thing that we need to shift. Like, why are we stocking brown trout? I guess is the simple question. Knowing what we know today, why are we stocking brown trout anymore in Wisconsin? Why aren't we just stocking brook trout and saying, screw it? And I know there's probably reasons I don't understand there, but I'd love to hear from you on that.
Well, the history of brown trout, you know, we're all descendants of European settlers. We are. And the early Europeans, I mean, there's a reason they call them German brown trout. So
my uncle
first
still
of
calls
all,
them.
our forefathers, they liked their homeboys. So there was this idea that enhancing ecosystems by adding new individuals didn't have a consequence. And so
That whole era.
whether it be carp, German carp, or common carp, or German brown trout, rainbow trout, the additional fish was the idea of supplementing opportunities for some of our early settlers that were of Germanic descent, or European descent at least. That's one thing. Why?
That's how it started.
That's how it started. Brown trout had better survivorship in thermally more marginal waters. They grew to a bigger size. We're stocking muskellunge in pike lakes. There's a desire for bigger fish.
Yep.
Brown trout grew to a bigger size. So there's a history there. But I could say this, that, you know, we're breaking clean of some of that history right now. We do not stock brown trout in any subwatersheds where there is any NR of either brook or brown.
Natural reproduction.
Yes,
Yes.
natural reproduction. So if we have evidence of natural reproduction in those subwatersheds, our biologists are prohibited from putting in any quotas for brown trout.
Interesting.
More importantly, in any brook trout natural reproduction. But if there's brown trout natural reproduction, they're prohibited from stocking. Now, these are new things in our program. So we have discontinued our domestic brook trout, or in the process of discontinuing our domestic reared brook trout. Okay? So we're changing.
Explain that piece more. I don't
So-
we will no longer stock brook trout.
No, our source populations will be our wild populations that don't have this introgression.
Got it.
So we're going to these wild populations to secure all their genetic resources, their gametes. We're not raising at Nevin a domestic strain of brook trout anymore. Our domestic strains for grow and take fishing or put and take will be more frequently. Now we're turning more to rainbow trout, but we're discontinuing domestic brook trout production statewide. Now, I think in the long run, our approach on brook trout will be, we don't stock to supplement angling for brook trout. We're trying to reestablish a population. So we really need to change some state law to look at restoring our authority to do wild fish transfers, to move brook trout from one isolated population to recover another one. And that's a tool we've lost since VHS came on the scene, and we can't move these fish. And so we're thinking about pathways to that. So we've rolled back some of our brown trout production, our stocking, where we're putting these fish. We recognize that is a problem with the naturalized non-native brown trout impacting brook trout, our native brook trout.
That's awesome.
So we are changing.
And I think it's
there
cool.
is a history of management there.
Yeah, I think it's cool too because
stocking.
as I mentioned earlier and you guys probably see this, but I think like the angling ethos is tracking to that too. And we hear it of like people would prefer to go out west and catch cutties. People would prefer to catch brookies in Wisconsin. Not everyone, not all the time, not the majority yet, but it's growing back. And I think because it just, it disheartens us, especially because it was before all of our times where these decisions were made. And they weren't made out of malicious intent. It was what you had said. It was brand new, foreign, just landed in America, and I want to, it makes sense. It makes sense that we brought brown trout over here. But now I think it's like we know a little bit better.
Well, you were going to ask me that question, I think. Would you do it different, right?
Yeah. Looking
you-
back, knowing what you know now, is there anything you'd change?
I was
do
reading.
anything
So
differently?
you shared your thoughts with me earlier, and I was my response to that, Josh, was, "Can I phone a friend?"
Sure. Yeah. We'll get you a phone quick.
Can I phone a friend? I think, yeah. I mean, obviously, today when we talk about species introductions of non-native species, we perform this risk analysis. We have an environmental assessment process. We want to minimize risk and consequences to the ecosystem of that new founder and that it doesn't get away from us. We still manage non-native species in the state. And we do so in the Great Lakes to the benefit of a whole sport fishing industry. We have a great brown trout following too, and so we can't walk away from that completely.
Totally.
So, but today we would be more analytical about the unintended consequences of an introduction and what are the risks of it. So, from that perspective, we would do things markedly different today. But that's hindsight is always a little 20/20 from that perspective.
For sure.
But I'm sure one of my friends would have a better answer than I just gave you if I phoned them.
No worries. That was a good answer anyways. All right, Dan.
I'm just reading them. We got through all of them. Those were, that to me, and I don't know if you agree or disagree, but when we talk about this in the shop or with anglers or at a Trout Unlimited meeting, that is like this brown trout versus brook trout thing, is it seems to stir people's emotions the most.
Well, and there are abundant brown trout populations in the southern driftless. As you move north, it diminishes. And those abundant brown trout populations preclude management for brook trout in many situations. And we're not yet at a place where we're capable of proposing rotenone to restore those streams to native brookies yet. So, the legacy of naturalized brown trout in the southern driftless streams is something that we're living with. It's not easy to dig out of that.
Sure.
And in some of those systems, with climate change, the brown trout will be better poised to handle that future climate than the brookies anyhow. So we'll talk about resist, accept, direct, but that's part of the accept and direct is brown trout management.
Right. That makes sense. Like this is what you get. These are the ones left.
Yeah.
I think we hit all those, Josh. I don't have, unless there was anything else you wanted to add on the brown trout brook trout dilemma, Paul. I think we can move on to the next piece.
And with that, we wrap up part 1 of episode 39 of the Spot Burn podcast. Huge thanks to Paul for sharing his deep insights into the Brook Trout Reserves Program. But don't go too far, because in part 2, we dive even deeper into the future of brook trout and what's being done to protect them for generations to come. You won't want to miss it, folks. Stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for tuning in to the Spot Burn podcast, brought to you by Musky Fool Fly Fishing Co. We're stoked to have you along for the ride. If you're fired up about the show and want to keep it blazing, share it with a friend, and don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Got a spark of inspiration, feedback, or just want to fan the flames of conversation? Head on over to muskyfool.com. We'd love to hear from you. Keep on burning and catch you on the water, y'all.